And hello from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We welcome you to today's SEI webcast, Tools for Building an AI-Enabled Security Operations Center. My name is Shane McGraw. I'm the Outreach Manager here at the Software Engineering Institute, and I'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make today's webcast as interactive as possible, so you can post questions in the chat or the Q&A tabs now, and we'll get to as many as we can. We also received a number of questions prior to the webcast. We will work in some of them as well. Now I'd like to introduce our featured speakers for today. Dr. Justin Novak is a senior security operations researcher in our CERT division who leads a team as part of the Security Operations Division that supports the U.S. Department of State, Department of War, and U.S. Treasury. In this role, Justin's main focus is on the capacity building for incident responders, both at the individual and organizational level. Welcome, Justin.
Great, thanks, Shane. Happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you. Chris Rodman is a senior cybersecurity operations researcher also within our CERT division, where he supports the U.S. government agencies in strengthening the operational capacity of international computer security and incident response teams for U.S. allies and partner nations. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, Shane. Happy to be here.
Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Justin Novak for opening remarks. Justin, all yours.
Great, thanks, Shane. We're really excited about this webinar today, or this webcast. We're looking forward to sharing a lot of kind of our experiences with capacity building and developing security operations capabilities kind of in the era of artificial intelligence, right? So for everyone's background, a little bit about our team. We've been doing capacity building work with security operations centers and incident response teams really for more than a decade here at the Software Engineering Institute. So SecOps team began work back in 2015, and our work really centers around understanding, community best practices, building community best practices, and helping teams from governments and different organizations achieve higher levels of operational maturity when it comes to security operations, things like incident response, running a CSIRT team, running a SOC team. So our work on this goes back quite a while, and we've always seen it as a very dynamic environment, right? The threat landscape is constantly changing, and the technological landscape is also constantly changing, right? So there's always new technologies, new threats, and new capabilities coming on board that defenders have to understand, that security operations centers need to integrate into their operations. That has only accelerated in the age of artificial intelligence. So our team has been looking into this for quite a while. And after our first several years of doing this work and looking at community best practices, we set out to sort of try to start building some tools that could help teams build these types of capabilities. So our research into this started in earnest back in 2021 when we started to build what we call the ontology for security operations centers, augmentation and development. So we built an ontology of knowledge that was based on not only our years of experience developing security operations capabilities, but on the experience of a lot of our friends and our colleagues within the international community through organizations like FIRST and things like that. We connected with a lot of experts. We started to build this ontology that serves really as a knowledge base that we can use and we can leverage to help new organizations either build or mature their capabilities. As I said, that kind of started in 2021, and as we all know, with the introduction of GPT 2.0 in 2022, that rapidly kind of changed things. So now we're looking at taking into account the new technologies, the new tools, and the new realities of that. So that's kind of a little bit about what we are, what we do, and how we kind of arrived at this topic for our webcast. So excited to get into the details and answer some of the questions. and talk about this subject.
So obviously you guys have been doing this for several years now, and the main question is how is the approach changing in the age of generative AI and large language models? So maybe we'll kick off with that one.
Yeah. So and that's really the fundamental question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have not only generative AI, but now more and more we're seeing agentic AI be a real tool for the defender, yes, but also for the malicious actors, for the attackers out there. So in our case, one of the things that we're doing with our ontology, an ontology is a great static body of knowledge. But we want to understand how we can use this in a more dynamic fashion and leverage some of the AI tools that are out there to improve upon it, to improve upon performance and help us, build better teams and better capabilities. So we're looking at using that ontology to potentially develop a whole sort of agentic workflow that can help teams build their security operations capabilities. So currently looking at using something like Neo4j. Neo4j is specifically built with ontologies in mind. So it's a great tool that's kind of almost purpose-built for what we're doing. But what we want to do is take our starting point and build this into a real interactive tool that someone with basic knowledge or even no knowledge can come in and say, here's my threat landscape, here's my organizational, here's my network, what my network looks like, here's my organization's goals, mission, so forth. What sort of capabilities do I need? And we look at that and we break it down into just sort of the traditional people, processes, and technology, right? Those three categories haven't changed even since we've started doing this work back in 2015, 2016, and even before, really. It all comes down to who do I need, the people, who do I need to run my security operations center? What processes do I need to put in place to enable them to do their job? And then what tools or hardware, software, so forth, do they need to effectively do their jobs? Some of the tools are changing, but the process that you go through to understand which ones you need is really the same. But what we want to do is, again, build some sort of automated workflow where people with limited resources or limited knowledge can do that much more quickly and much more efficiently. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. And of course, we're going to be talking in this webcast, I think, about that, but also about some of the general ways that security operations centers can use the new AI tools, again, both generative AI and other AI tools like agentic AI. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Those three pillars are critically important, and I don't believe that they change when you start to augment how you're implementing your SOC, how you're running your SOC with AI models. Those things will still stand. When we talk about people, maybe their responsibilities change a little bit. When we talk about policy, there has to be a structured framework in developing the strategy, the way that we implement and guide those models in accordance with our SOC operations. And then the technology aspect, now we're augmenting some of our technology stack that the security operations teams are using with the power to analyze large data sets at real time. So those foundations still exist. And I believe moving forward, they'll just be augmented to incorporate AI as kind of a partner, as an aid in security operations.
So if we can dive a little bit deeper into some of the specific AI challenges that are, facing you guys, and I'm sure there's many. But one area is there's a lot of AI process automation now that you guys are seeing, I'm sure, all the time. But how can SOCs effectively integrate all this automation into their existing workflows? And how do you orchestrate the agentic workflows without becoming dependent on AI-driven tools and outputs? And how do you keep your analysts engaged? So I know it's a lot. We'll repeat that, but
it is. But it's funny. Chris and I were just talking earlier today before we came in here, and one of the things I think that we joke about is that we're all orchestrators now.
Yeah,
we're working with the AI. We're working with AI agents. We're working with AI tools you give your AI agents instructions, but then they're coming back to you with information that you need to act on. So it's really a collaborative relationship, and you have to think of it in that way. You can't think of just automation and I'm going to deploy these agents and they're going to go do things and I'm going to wash my hands of it and not think about it. It's an interactive relationship. So when you're building these processes, when you're building automated workflows, yeah, you're thinking about things like human in the loop. You're thinking about things like, am I making sure I give it good inputs? But there's other aspects as well, like what is it giving me and what am I going to do with it? So you don't want to become overly dependent on your AI tools, but certainly you want to leverage them to the extent that you can.
Yeah, certainly. And, not trying to boil the ocean at once, a SOC has a lot of different responsibilities. If we kind of break that down into one specific area, say incident response, then we start to look at the different ways that AI models, agentic AI, can be utilized in the preparation phases of how a SOC is going to respond to incidents. We can look at how the SOC will utilize AI for containment, recovery, post-incident activities, even some of the more nuanced things of preparing communications for executive leadership based off of their findings. And that goes into conjunction with all of the other capabilities that incorporating the ability to digest, synthesize, analyze, and give good output from large and dynamic data sets in real time, I think is where we're going to start to see most of the real benefit. And again, that's one small responsibility of what a SOC has to consider on their day-to-day operations. There's several other aspects that we could belabor all day long. So.
One thing that I want to mention here, and it's something that I'm probably going to mention a couple times more during this conversation, is the number one tool that every organization needs to run an effective AI-enabled SOC. And it's nothing exciting. It's not Claude Mythos Preview. It's the strategy. And I know that's not the most exciting part of our job. And some people like, oh, I have to develop a strategy. I gotta, go back and talk to management and things like this. But if you want to talk about how am I going to integrate automated processes, AI agentic workflows, how are we going to leverage frontier AI models, how are we going to do all of this? There's a lot of questions that you have to answer, but the answers to those questions are going to be driven by your organization's mission, by your organization's risk tolerance level, for things like, how much are we going to automate, how many people are we going to have in the loop, budget issues, things like this. And that should all be part of an AI strategy that your organization hopefully has. If your organization doesn't have an AI strategy, you as a security team should at least have one that's going to outline your risk tolerances, that's going to outline what are your goals for doing this. Are you automating because you want to reduce costs, or are you automating because you want to increase capabilities? Those are two completely different goals. And that depending on what your goal is, that's going to drive how you make decisions and how you integrate some of these things.
So you mentioned human in the loop there. I mentioned we also got a ton of questions ahead of the webcast. So one of the ones we wanted to address was what strategies would you recommend for building trust in the AI components of a SOC workflow? In your opinion, which areas absolutely require a human in the loop and which can be regulated to a machine to process? Want to tackle that one first, Justin or Chris?
Do you want to take that one?
Certainly, yeah. So like I said, AI models are really, really good at synthesizing those large data sets, looking at data in real time. But that's largely dependent on the data that is being fed into the model. Right. Therefore, at some design level, at some strategic level, there has to be a person that is setting the requirements, doing the design, and kind of understanding the different contexts that have to be fed into that model in order to make it useful and effective. Probably, I would say, one of the tools, so to speak, is having a good foundation of requirements that, as to Justin's point earlier, why are we implementing this model? And then some of the lower level characteristics of what kind of data will this model need to make effective decisions or give good predictive analysis for my objectives. That's at the design level. I would say then after implementation, there's going to be constant tuning. There's going to be what we call oversight. There was a report that I recently read within the last day that described the amount of oversight that SOC analysts are currently dedicating to model implementation today is on average of 8.6 hours per week. And you could argue that, wow, that's a lot of time for a SOC analyst to be dedicating time to the care and feeding of the model, not necessarily reacting to incidents or tuning monitoring capabilities. But when you think about it holistically, the analyst oversight on that model is effectively achieving those things that the model is interacting with. I'm making my monitoring capability more effective by tuning the model, by giving it organizational context. Maybe a piece of regulation has changed that is specific to my sector, and the analyst knows that, but the model might not. So making those fine-tuned adjustments are critically important. So I would say human in the loop for design, human in the loop for oversight.
Absolutely. I think you said it. A lot of it does go back to your organizational strategy and what some of your risk tolerances are. I would add to that, security operations is probably not the only part of your organization that is using AI tools or using AI models to do part or all of its work. So your organization may have like an ML ops team or something like that. So that might be a place that you can go to for guidance on, when do we need to have humans in the loop? What is our organizational level tolerance for that? And then just another thing that you mentioned, Chris, is data. Think about where you're getting your data. Data provenance is really important. Do you trust the data? If you trust the data, that suggests you might have a little bit easier time trusting the model or trusting the agent to be a little bit more autonomous. So think about things like that.
A couple of things just coming in the chat, if we can take a look at them real quick. We have a question about behavior tracking, which people immediately said the SOC would have to track. And it says, I think this might be an AI issue, correct? Is that something that you guys can speak to?
So I guess when I think about behavior tracking, thinking about like user behavior analytics, things like that, are we monitoring people's activities, looking for insider threat, things like that? I think that AI can be a very powerful tool to track those sorts of things. My concern here with this particular issue is privacy concerns, compliance concerns, legal issues that you might run into. If you just have AI agents autonomously monitoring your employees' behavior or your users' behavior, that there's definitely privacy and legal concerns that you'll want to address. So again, strategy, what is your organization's, legal position on this? What laws do you have in place that you need to follow? So understand your jurisdiction, understand things like that, and make sure you're applying those things as needed.
Yeah. The behavior aspects are quite interesting, particularly, as I mentioned before, how these models have the ability to digest large amounts of data, large data sets, and make some sense of them, make some reasoned decision about what it's seeing faster than a human can. When you think about areas like insider threat, you would consider, from an organizational perspective, in the past, you might observe internet traffic outbound to your organization, and if you see a large uptick in, people looking for jobs elsewhere, you might think, okay, well, there's someone who's considering leaving, I should maybe have some idea of what they have access to, or even more nefarious behavior. Now a model can digest other data points at the endpoint, at the network, at the access level. There's all kinds of different nuances that can go into a decision now that go beyond what just the human capable decision points used to be.
Kind of a two-part question from Kevin. One, just asking if you guys are aware of the OWASP generative AI security project. You guys familiar with that body of work, or any comment on that? He was just asking if you're aware of it.
I haven't really studied that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. I do track a lot of the OWASP stuff in general, but the OWASP AI stuff, their top 10 list is something that I've begun reading and have kind of gotten some familiarity with.
And then another one, then we'll move back on to the next question. Kevin asked, how do we handle the AI swarms that will be coming to crack the legacy encryption ciphers that our organizations prepared for quantum computing? Is that something we want to get into now, or?
I think that could be a whole webcast unto itself. Real quickly.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point to bring up the fact that these AI tools are going to help us as defenders, but they're also going to enable the attacker to not only make current attack vectors more dangerous, but to develop novel new attacks, and to do things like crack existing encryption. And quantum computing is certainly a different webcast, I think.
Yep.
But I think, Kevin, I share your concerns.
Yeah.
But maybe a topic for another day.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to our next question, talking about ROI. How do you ensure that you're getting value from investments in AI tools and infrastructure?
Yeah.
For example, how do you ensure a good ROI if we're going down this path?
Yeah. So I have some numbers here because I knew this was going to come up. So IBM put out a report end of last year. 25% of AI initiatives are delivering their expected return on investment right now. 25%, which seems a little low because there's a lot of AI initiatives out there right now. There was another report that I saw recently from Gartner that said something like 40% of agentic AI projects are expected to be canceled by the end of next year, end of 2027. So certainly you want to be careful about how you're investing your money, because not everything that everyone's doing with artificial intelligence tools is working out. So you want to be careful with your money. From an organizational perspective, though, in my opinion, the biggest cost that you could have is a data breach. So I encourage organizations, and I encourage us as defenders and security operations specialists to keep in mind that when we're talking about return on investment, it's not just, well, this was being done by a human and it cost me X dollars. Now I can have an agent do it and it cost me some fraction of X dollars. That's great. You've saved some money, but is that short-sighted? Is the tool performing better? That's an equally important question, right? So don't just automate for the sake of automating. If you can automate and gain efficiencies without losing operational effectiveness, that's the sweet spot. That's where you want to be. So, think about that. Of course, you can think about traditional return on investment, and that you want to think about, what is AI really good at? It's best at repetitive tasks. We know that. Think about what your people are putting a lot of time into without having to put a lot of cognitive energy into. So, save your people for those cognitively challenging tasks, and just be really deliberate about kind of the first thing that we talked about, making sure that your people and your AI tools are working together, right? They're one's not working for the other. We're working together as a team. So you're developing workflows with that kind of thing in mind.
Yeah, and just to pivot off of that, the workforce development aspect is certainly something that is discussed a lot whenever we start talking about the implementation of these AI models. The AI model is going to take my job is a phrase that is said quite frequently. However, I don't believe that to be the case. There are several instances where we see this human machine teaming start to come into play, and the return on investment there is what I call human capital gains, where it's making the workforce experience better for the SOC analysts. We understand that there is a large percentage of analysts that experience burnout from addressing large swaths of alerts and responding to a lot of incidents, spending long hours, long days doing this kind of work. Here we have the opportunity to augment that work with these models that can pick up kind of the heavy lifting, start to bring the critical incidents, the more high severity, the more important things to the analyst's attention, and allow them to focus on the things that require critical thought. So I feel as though there's going to be a large benefit from that perspective. And if we can do things like reduce turnover, or reduce the need to continuously hire new people, continuously train new people, then that's going to be huge return on investment for organizations.
Yeah, I think that totally aligns with something I said earlier, which is kind of, why are we using AI? What's our goal here? Do you want to do the same amount of work you're doing now, but using less resources? So we're doing the same amount of work, but at a lower cost? Or do you want to do more work at the same cost? We're spending the same amount of money, but we're getting to do more. We're getting to more alerts. We're doing a deeper dive on our investigations, things like that. I would argue for the latter. I think it's much better that we maintain our resource level, but get to do more, get to cover more ground. But different organizations may have different priorities. Again, that goes back to strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So a question or a comment from Steven in the chat just said 8+ hours per week of model tuning eats into reportable time savings.
Yeah.
Probably not something leadership is taking into consideration. So
absolutely agree. Yeah, that's a huge factor. How much time are you putting, and is your team putting into training models, developing, training agents, developing tools, things like that? Again, the numbers I cited kind of say it all. A lot of money and time is being put into developing processes, workflows that aren't going anywhere. So be mindful of that and be careful where you invest.
Yeah.
And I think just a comment here from Ray, true, his comment is just true. Human in the loop for design is the only way to get ahead of this. Humans just not fast enough at the modern tactical edge. With the advent of Mythos, is this our Pearl Harbor moment that will compel a better job in building in software and architectural resilience ahead of time?
Chris and I thought about just coming in and saying, after, the news earlier this week, just use Mythos. That's all. We'll take questions now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, obviously I haven't, interacted with that model myself. Not a lot of people have yet. But from everything I've read about it, it's certainly a giant leap forward. But I would caution against getting too excited about that in two ways. One, everything that I've read in terms of the applications that they've tested it on is sort of a narrow list of tasks that we do as defenders. And a lot of those are kind of outside what you're doing as a security operations center. Anyways, I think workflow automation is much more impactful for a SOC than something like a really effective, really frontier model like Mythos. And then the other thing is, I think the comment said something about people, humans in the loop.
Yeah.
You always have to have, at some point, I really think you always have to have a human in the loop, because without that, you're not really doing operations. You're just doing automated security.
Yeah.
So I have concerns there as well.
Yeah, and there's also the concept of, the contextual basis of what the model is telling you. There's going to be instances where some of these models are going to be really good at exploiting vulnerabilities, finding new bugs in code. However, the real meaning of that risk to your organization is something that you have to consider from a very contextual space. Sure, I might have a piece of that software that is exploitable, but it might also be 9 layers deep in my network. So what's the true impact? What's the true risk of that particular finding mean to my organization? So what does that model at large mean for the risk posture of my organization?
Great comment. Isabel had asked, do you use synthetic data or do some work in making the training set unbiased?
Yeah, we've definitely worked with generating synthetic data. I think it can be a highly useful substitute when obtaining actual data is either difficult or costly or something like that. And when I have used it, we've had good success with it. We've used it with I mentioned our ontology, Oscar, and how we're trying to kind of evolve that into a more robust tool. So we've done some generation of synthetic data for that. I think it's very useful for training scenarios, and that's one of the areas that I think we can leverage AI tools really well for security operations. To do training or to maintain training, things like that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of synthetic data.
Yeah, certainly. Just going back to that incident response example I mentioned earlier, again, I won't try to boil the ocean, but when you start to look at some of the activities that your incident responders will do in preparation for an incident, do things like have tabletop exercises or breach and attack simulations. A lot of times trying to use real data, use real malware, use real injects or static injects tend to fall short. So you might start to consider augmenting those activities with these models that have access to dynamic data. Tell me the injects for this threat actor as of yesterday for this tabletop I'm running today. Those are things that require a lot of legwork for a person to go through, an instructor to go through as they're building this sort of experience to prepare the organization for responding to an incident, whereas a model can do it dynamically. So, and even sometimes, synthetic data in that space or in the place of like an actual piece of malware is probably preferred.
Yeah. And kind of as an example of that, with our research that we did to build this ontology, we went and we interviewed 25 different community experts from around the world. That's a process that took months.
Sure.
It took us months to gather that data. I won't belabor everyone with the details of the research. You can read our paper, or have ChatGPT summarize the paper.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, we went to these experts and we kind of asked them to envision themselves in a scenario where you work for such and such an organization that has a certain risk profile and a certain organizational profile, and then to describe how they might build a security operations capability for that organization. Now I can take that same prompt, and rather than asking an expert, I can ask a large language model, or I can ask a couple different models to get its response, and that gives me synthetic data about this scenario that I can use to update my ontology or to train my model or something like that. So that's how we're kind of using it. But there's a lot of ways you can do that.
Yeah, the one thing that I would caution with the use of synthetic data too, and this was just some light reading I've been doing over the last couple of weeks, is that you really have to take into consideration what your intent on using that model is going to be. For example, Justin and I were talking about this earlier, utilizing things like EPSS for the endpoint. Exploitability prediction scoring system versus using just other things like CVE to track exploitability of vulnerabilities. Some might be a little bit more dynamic and rich in real time, whereas others go through a more rigorous kind of trustworthy verification process. So we have something that's more real time, more tactical, something else that's more verifiable, more strategic. you have to take into careful consideration which one of those types of data sets you're feeding into your model in order to get your desired outcome.
Right. Isabel had asked a clarifying question. Just when you are saying, or when you say having human in the loop, are you considering to have neuron decisions looked at by humans to ensure they are working well, or just readjusting the model after the results?
Well, I'm caveat by saying I'm a SOC expert, not a machine learning expert.
Correct.
But my response to that would be both to the extent possible. But I think you have to balance your human in the loop with your return on investment, right? You can't have too much human in the loop where it kind of negates the strength or the value of using an AI tool. So if you're putting a human in the loop at every step, you're slowing the process down, which offsets any efficiency gains that you might see by using an AI tool. So that's sort of a general response to maybe when to use human in the loop, without really addressing the specific question.
Next area we got lots of questions is managing your workforce. So sometimes this really means reducing your workforce. So what are your thoughts on how AI can be used to enhance or improve the SOC workforce?
Yeah. So one of the things one of the questions I think I've seen a lot of is, Chris said, is this going to take all of our jobs?
Yeah.
I think someone had asked, is this going to make tier one analysts obsolete?
Yeah.
I'll kind of start, and I'll circle back to this at the end of my response. But food for thought: if all the tier one analysts become obsolete and we don't have them anymore, where are the tier two analysts going to come from?
Yeah.
Right. Of course, it's not that simple. I think what you're really looking at is, in that case, in the example, 3 tiers of analysts, SOC analysts. That's a construct that we came up with that made sense in the context of how SOCs were developed and operated really over the last 10 to 15 years or so. That concept may no longer make any sense whatsoever. So in 2 years and 3 years and 5 years, tier one analysts may become obsolete, but we may no longer talk about tier one, tier two, and tier three, right? That might just be a construct that's no longer useful for us. So we're transforming a workforce. It may be a matter of, the skills that used to, be part of a tier one analyst job role, that's now done by an AI agent.
Yeah.
But the tier two analyst, or whatever we're calling it now, because we no longer have 3 tiers, they have to understand those skills, understand that knowledge, so that they're the one overseeing the AI agents, or they're doing orchestration. So, there's a lot of rethinking of how we structure these roles and how we define them. Definitely retraining, upskilling is going to be a huge thing. We hope that a lot of our academic institutions are, keeping up to date with their curriculum. So our analysts are coming out not only with cybersecurity skills, but with orchestration skills and knowledge about how to do orchestration. Right. That's the new skill, right? We're all orchestrators now.
Yes.
So, rethinking completely how we do these work roles is, I think, going to be something that we'll see over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that some of the challenges that are, that come with augmenting your SOC with an AI model will start to get addressed and absorbed by those analysts as well. Things like the calibration of the model, the performance of the data set, the trustworthiness, the explainability, all of that stuff starts to come into play. One of the aspects that I revert back to whenever I think about how a tier one analyst might augment their job role in the SOC is the concept of explaining the outcomes that the model has provided to them in a reasonable way. Can they explain why this one alert came through to them and what to do about it? Can they describe the appropriate steps to get through a recovery plan that a model has suggested to them? Those are things that come along with experience in the field. So there's going to have to be some level of learning that analyst is going to have to go through, whether it's on the job, whether it's, in practice, in simulation, whatever the case may be, there's still going to have to be a component of continual learning for these analysts moving forward.
I love that, and I want to add one thing, to go back to the research that we did when we were building our SOC ontology. One of the things that we asked all of the experts that we talked to, every single one of them, and we got almost uniformly the same answer was, what skills are more important, technical skills or soft skills? And the answer every time was soft skills. I'm looking for soft skills in my analysts. I need people who can think, who can analyze, and who can be creative. Those are the important skills. The agents can do the technical work.
Yeah. Our own curiosity is our most greatest security control, right?
Yeah.
A question we had gotten earlier, but we were just talking about analysts here. How can a SOC analyst identify hallucinations? Is there a particular training for that, or is it just using the models enough?
Well, do you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, this was just, again, one of those areas that requires experience in the field.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that, a particular event that the model is presented to you is accurate, or the outcomes of maybe a script that it ran makes sense, then there's no real way to validate that, yes, the model hallucinated, or it missed a piece of evidence, or it missed a step in the workflow. So understanding what that looks like, especially in an organizational context, is going to be vastly important. Now, we could argue that you can do some cross-checking with another model. So I have, these scenarios where I have more than one model doing the same analysis on an event, on a workflow, that are giving me should be consistent results. And if that varies, then, hey, someone's wrong here. I need to dig a little deeper into this. So those are a couple of key areas that I think of.
Even before the age of artificial intelligence and security operations, I've always liked to emphasize that you have to know your data and know your network. Yeah. And I've always liked to paraphrase Sun Tzu, know your adversary's TTPs and know your own network traffic, and 100 out of 100 false positives you will not miss. Yeah. We could update that to the AI age and say, know your model and know your data, and 100 out of 100 hallucinations you will not miss.
Yep. So. Another question we got: how can AI be used to reduce analyst fatigue in the SOC? Any comments to that?
Well, I think you sort of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah. That just goes back to the models doing that large data analysis, where they're looking at perhaps. I think the one area that we're growing from in terms of security monitoring is, sure, we have the signature-based analysis, but now we're emphasizing and putting greater power into the behavior-based analysis. So now we're looking at what's the baseline behavior like on these systems, these groups of machines, these groups of people and operating in this system. And that's allowing that model to make more distinct decisions that, hey, Justin did in fact click on a bad link, or, hey, this is actually a program that only runs once a year on Justin's machine that, does some sort of, software inventory cleanup or something like that. So I feel as though the augmentation of that behavior-based analytical capability is going to greatly reduce those numbers of false positives and hopefully false negatives, to the degree that analysts have a better work experience.
Yeah, reducing false positives. False positives are the worst, most mind-numbing, frustrating, fatiguing thing that a SOC analyst can deal with. So,
all right, a little longer question from Vince, but bear with me. Asks, is there any research or data on how much training, both initially and then an ongoing basis, to train an AI to reduce false positives and false negatives, especially in large, complex IT ecosystems? Any comments there?
Yeah. That's a great question. I'm not actually familiar with any research that kind of gives you guidance on how much training is required. I can only speculate, but I would guess it would depend on the size and complexity of your enterprise, of your organization and your network. A more complex organization is likely going to need more training and more data, but that's just a question of scale.
Yeah, and it also depends on within your organization, what data do you have accessible that you can feed back into a model?
Yeah.
That can be heavily reliant on the sector that your organization exists in, the regulatory requirements that your organization is bound to. So if you're not able to feed certain data points back into the model in order to make these more finite distinctions, then you run the risk of losing that contextual analysis. As far as a finite amount of data, that I don't know.
Yeah. And Vince's second part to the question was fast event generation is good, but best case is no false positives and effective prioritizing alerts. This is a huge challenge for SOCs and their tools today. Is there real world data demonstrating that AIs are better at this? Anything you have?
I mean, I absolutely agree with the point that is the biggest challenge, and that's when we work with organizations, that's usually the first goal. How can we be more efficient with our time? How can we reduce things like false positives? I'm not familiar with any data kind of affirming that AI tools can help with this, but it certainly we see use cases where it does. We see anecdotal evidence that it does, and kind of subjective arguments that it does, but I'm not really familiar with any studies that have been done on that. I think that would be a fascinating area of research.
Yeah, certainly. There's, I think the closest thing that I've read recently was a report that talked about the implementation of AI models to do these kind of activities versus the reality of models that are actually in use. So the expectation and then the reality. And I think it was on magnitudes of expectation was that these models would handle 90% of our alerts versus reality is that they're only handling the informational or low severity type of alerts, which again, it could be beneficial to reducing analyst fatigue, but I don't know that there's quite a trustworthiness or an explainability comfort level yet for some of those medium to high severity type of incidents.
And it's also going to depend on how sophisticated your AI workflows are. If you're just feeding your alerts into a large language model and saying which of these are serious, that's a very limited use case. If you're developing and training, agentic workflows with multi-agent orchestration and things like that, you're going to get a lot better result, but that requires more upfront investment of time and resources.
Yeah.
Another question from Awad asking, as institutions prepare the next generation of SOC analysts, should we be teaching students not only to how to use agentic AI tools, but also how to apply XAI, verify AI reasoning, to detect hallucinations, and correct unreliable outputs? What other competencies do you see as essential for this new generation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, absolutely, developing agentic workflows, using AI in an applied fashion. In terms of validating the efficacy of the models and things like that, in my mind, that's still largely a separate discipline. That's a machine learning discipline. That's something that I think every organization probably needs someone who can do those things. But I don't know that the SOC analysts need to be able to do those things.
Right.
They need to be able to understand the discipline so that they can interact with an expert who can help them do that. But in my opinion, SOC analysts should be focused on security tasks and security roles first, with that sort of thing as sort of an extra or a bonus or an outsourced task.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on that, enabling security experts to understand how to properly calibrate a model especially ones that are predictive in nature, things that are going to tell us, hey, here's the exploitability score of this particular asset in your organization, or even helping analysts understand how to evaluate the data sets, the performance natures, how stale or fresh the data set is before it gets fed back into the model. Those are, I think, critical skills that are going to have to be taught and understood for some of these analysts to go into some of these AI augmented roles.
Before we get maybe about 10 minutes left before we get into a couple more questions, just some maybe closing thoughts from you guys or future work that you want to get into before we get to the last question. So Justin.
Yeah. So closing thoughts for me, like I said, we got into this work before AI was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing this a long time. Really, the pace of change is the big difference here. As SecOps people, as defenders, we've always seen rapidly changing technology, rapidly changing threats, but the pace has really, really quickened. So we have to be able to keep up, and that means understanding how to use these tools, understanding how to apply them in your security operations, but also understanding how the adversary is going to be applying them. When we look at our research, we're looking at things like making sure we're being dynamic, updating all of our training, all of our workflows, things like that, and then trying to understand how the adversary is doing it. So I would point people towards some of the research that we've done on SOC development in general and some of the tools that we're dividing. And my closing thought before we get to another couple questions is don't overthink things. Since I started working on this team, looking at capacity development, every team we talk to is looking for that sort of Goldilocks tool that is not expensive, but saves me so much time and everything else. It doesn't exist. Don't overthink it. Don't expect that some tool is going to save the day, and focus on the basics.
Great.
Yeah, certainly. I think just to piggyback off that, I share a similar thought that, and we've said this for years, is that there is no silver bullet when it comes to having a holistic cybersecurity program. And I think that as we move into this augmented space where we are, enabling security operations analysts, security operations teams, national level incident response teams with these tools, I feel as though there's going to be an even greater emphasis on keeping humans in that loop. We still, even despite talking about how good these models are at crunching data and analyzing data and giving us outcomes, humans are still exceptionally good at deriving context, having empathy, understanding consequence. So I think all of those factors are going to come into play as we start to see the integration of these technologies into this space.
Great advice. Thank you both for that. So we'll get another question or two. Persona had typed in, supply chain problems are becoming a challenge. How does a SOC manage such since the detection alerts are chasing the logs? So reaction to trigger architecture misconfiguration might help. Any suggestions?
I guess what kind of supply chain, or are we talking about the AI supply chain? Are we talking about supply chain attacks?
So Persona, if you can type that in, that would help. And we'll move on to another one. This one came in ahead of the webcast. Let me find it here. It was, how can we leverage the information from your discussion to integrate security into the operations with better operational techniques? 1 sec here. It cut off for me. Yeah. How can we leverage the information from your discussion to integrate security operations with better operational technology security practice? And that was from Brent.
So operational technology is a really good example. Do you want to start with this one?
So
I have some thoughts, but
yeah. A couple of key thoughts come to mind. One, the OT space is pretty siloed whenever you're talking about how the systems are isolated and segregated off so that, they run less of a risk of compromise. The whole defense in depth strategy comes into play. I don't think that the defense in depth strategy changes with the implementation of these models. We may start to see more implementation of models that are network or machine centric. So, we may still augment what we're seeing with alerts and how a model is doing recommendations on containment, eradication, all that sort of stuff. So I feel as though the structures may be very similar, but just working with different data sets, different protocols that exist in OT versus IT. So I feel as though we're going to start to see, it's like saying we still see the same three pillars of people, process, technology. I feel as though a lot of those lessons are still going to be the same. We're just going to be working with different data sets, different regulatory requirements, and so on.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with what you said. The OT space is probably the same activities that we're doing in the SecOps space, but with a special case. It's a unique case of SecOps. So if you're training a model or training an agent to help you with some of these things in an OT environment, make sure you have appropriate data, right? Data specific to that industrial control system or to that operational environment. And then, of course, the regulatory concerns are going to be unique to that environment. And also your risk posture might be unique to that environment. So there might be specific risk questions that you want to ask as a security team and as an organization. Is my risk tolerance different because this is an OT environment or because this is an industrial control system? So what additional sort of risk principles do we need to be applying? What questions do we need to be asking and looking at things from that perspective as well?
Justin, Chris, great discussion today. Really thank you for sharing your expertise. We appreciate you taking some time to share your work and again, sharing your expertise. And last but not least, we'd like to thank you all for attending today. Upon exiting, we do ask that you complete the survey that will launch at the close of the webcast. Next, our next webcast will be April 28th. Our topic will be when performance isn't enough, ensuring the safety and security of AI systems. Registration information is on the SEI website now and will be emailed out as well. Any follow-up questions from today, please send to info@sei.cmu.edu. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.